Hi, my name is Aaron, and I will be doing my research, journal research on the school-based childhood sexual abuse programs, and it is by the Sage Journal Publications. That's where I got this article from. As well, one of the first questions is, what was the research question? And the main research question in this article was, is sexually a childhood sexual abuse programs, effective in school? Are they needed? And then where the nurse part, the in-school nurse parts come in, how better can it be taught? A lot of the times when we talk about sex being taught in schools, typically is done by a teacher who probably doesn't know much about the subject, or is going off their own personal or what the school told them to teach. And so now a lot of times you do see nurses in those classrooms, especially when it comes to these type of topics. And me personally, these type of topics weren't taught to me in school. Like childhood sexual abuse wasn't ever really talked about. I'm from the Midwest, Michigan, so definitely wasn't talked about as well. Living in Nevada, I didn't really have a childhood sexual abuse program taught to me in school or anything like that, and I've been going to school here since middle school. So from middle school, I never personally had that experience. And then the next question was, why is this research important or relevant to the field of sex education? And I think this is pretty relevant to sex education, just because I think a lot of times we don't really take the time to talk about childhood sexual abuse, especially when it comes to in schools and in their programs. I think a lot of times it's looked over, and like the article talks about, a lot of people think it's too soon. It can be damaging, and if they're unsure, if it's necessary to be used in school. And I guess I can see it from that standpoint if it's for younger children. But when I think when it comes to kids in their later life, like elementary school, so in that fifth grade age, as well as middle school and high school, I think this is definitely something that can be useful. And I think because it teaches them a lot of core things, like how to say no, how to talk to parents, how not to hide, be scared to tell parents about these things happening, or any guardian that they may have. Just how to stand up for themselves and things like that. And I think that's really important, especially as a child at age where, you're taught to listen to an adult. You're taught to just, do what adult says and things like that. So knowing when, if you feel, you know, uncomfortable with something being, happening, or you feel uncomfortable, how to, digest that at a young age. And maybe, some people may think that's too soon, teaching this to a 10-year-old. But if you teach a 10-year-old, if they don't feel comfortable with something, how to address it, how to talk about it, and not, hold it in, and then when they're 20 years old realize that, oh, maybe I was sexually assaulted, or maybe those were signs, and not putting the blame on the child. Of course, never that, but just knowing how to, see it ahead of time. And so, hopefully, nothing, terrible does happen. And that was something that they also talked about in the research, where, parents or people feeling like, you're putting the responsibility on the child. And I don't think of it that way. I think of it just giving them tips and giving them ways to help with their self-esteem, because that was one of the big indicators in the research, that children coming out of it did feel added self-esteem. They did feel have more confidence in themselves to, stand up for themselves, which is huge. And I think that's great. I think it's more for that, and it just helps to for them to be able to stand their ground, because I think a lot of times when you think of that situation, it's terrible and it is sad. And so, just so if it does sadly ever happen, they know how to say no, stand up for themselves. And if it does happen, how to, tell their parents, how to talk to somebody. And I think that's really important, because it happens to way more, children than we, I think at times realize. And I think something else, why this I think this research is important. It's just, I think it's just something that isn't talked about. It's not talked about, and I think, especially in schools, this should be talked about, Personally, I think this is definitely something for middle school and high school, fifth grade, but I don't because their research on from preschool to high school. I think preschool um, might be a little hard to maybe grasp it because they do have different ways of teaching it. They talked about documentaries, plays, like real life acting it out, as well. I think as well as movies, just different ways of just showing it, so it can be taught in a more child-like minded way, which is good. They aren't trying to be too explicit with it. They just want them to be knowledgeable on it. And then next question was what information did the researcher gain? And the researcher gained a lot of information for this. This research was more of kind of putting a lot of different researchers together over since I think 1999 or 19 well really the 1990s until around now. I would say the article came out around 2015, so around that time, and just kind of deciphering that and what that means. The people who wrote this article, they do say this is a basically an inclusion of everything, and we're just kind of deciphering it, talking about what we think is the best ways of teaching it, the best programs, and how it affected people. So it was really just a big learning experience for them as a whole. This is something that they researched on and they did a lot on, so it was really cool to see what limitations. It was quite a few limitations working with research that dated back, to the 1990s, as well as using like different programs that was supposedly being done in the 1970s, but it wasn't a lot of documentation. So you're dealing with just a lot of things from 20 plus years ago, and just a lot of limitations in that, as well as some of the research that they that was done. Newer research came out after the fact, so they talked about that as well. Not having the things that they talked about in the article. Research has come out, maybe has talked about it a little bit deeper, gave them more information that they had prior. So just things like that was a lot more of their limitations. And then what was the most interesting thing? And just learning about the subject is something that I haven't really known about, and just being able to see the process of it and everything going into it. I just thought it was a really interesting thing to see, and I think it is a discussion that should be had in schools because it wasn't had in mine. I think it would have made a big difference if it was. So for a lot of children who maybe experienced it and just knowing how to handle the situation. So that's my take on the article.